So I just wanted to thank you for this opportunity. So we've put a tremendous amount of work in on this budget over the last, really the last 4 months. It's been truly a collaborative effort. I've asked my administrative team to be here today. They've heard this a couple times now, so forgive them, but we really just wanted to make sure that it was the voice that we all really work towards. And so we look at our budget. Where are we now? And so when we talk about where our district is right now, our enrollment is about 2,225 students with a total budget of just under $32 million. You can't see that, but we're going to blow it up for you so you can see. But how do we build the budget? So that's always kind of a question. Where do we start? And so, in our district, we've always used the term what zero-based budgeting means. And so we're going to kind of go over that a little bit and give you some examples of how that is actually applied. So every year we start with zero and build the budget based on the student's needs. Examples of our zero-based budgeting in practice. So here's a graph, and I'm going to kind of go up a little bit. Actually, use a pointer, actually. Yeah, so you can see on the side here, on the left-hand side, is enrollment. So 800 students would be the very top. Zero would be the bottom. On the side here would be our classroom staff. So 45 staff members down to 12. And so when we look at the budget, the red represents where we are currently, and the yellow is what we're projecting for next year. So you can see Marshwood High School, from an enrollment standpoint, is slightly down from where it is currently. And so if you look at the dot above that, our staffing level is here, and then it's going to be slightly less this year, next year based on the enrollment. So as the population decreases in this case, our staffing is going to decrease. And this is just our non-special ed classroom teachers. If you look at Marshwood Middle School, the enrollment looks about the same. So we have the red demonstrates where we are currently. This is what we're projecting for next year. And as you can see here, the staffing does stay the same because the numbers are the same. Marshwood Great Works School, you're going to see a slight increase from this year to next year. And because of that increase, if you look down at the bottom here, based on our staff, we are going to need an additional teacher because of the increase in student population. Central School, you do see again, there's a slight increase in enrollment at Central School, but not enough to warrant an additional classroom teacher. So that even though the students went up, we do feel like we have the staffing that is correct. And then if you look at Elliott Elementary School, you're going to see a slight reduction in the number of students, so therefore we're going to recommend a reduction in our staff. So again, that's all based on our district policy around class sizes, and we'll go over that a little bit as well. And so what does that class size policy say? What it says, and I'm just going to kind of summarize, is our pre-K is really clean and clear-cut. That's really a state mandate. So we can't have more than 16 students in a pre-K class. And so if you were a pre-K teacher and you're in the classroom by yourself, you could have up to 8 students and that would be okay. To have 16, you would have to have an ed tech with you. And so if I had 9 students in the class, by state law, I would have to have a teacher and an ed tech. So anything over 8 would require the second staff. Kindergarten through grade 1, our class size policy says it's 14 to 18 students. And remember, as we talk about this, we always try to budget in the middle of that policy. And a few years ago, when we had some difficult budgets with some funding issues arose, we had to go towards the top end of that policy. So really, but our goal was to always be in the middle of that. Grades 2 to grade 5 is 18 to 22 students. Grade 6 to grade 8 is 18 to 25 students. And grade 9 to grade 12 is 15 to 25 students. And so how does this get applied? So the policy also says that if you go one above the policy recommendation or one below the policy recommendation, I don't need to come to the board to get approval for that. So we're able to manage that on the building level. So for example, at Marshwood Middle School, if we had 26 students in an algebra class, we could handle that ourselves and just be able to put the extra student in, and we'd have the flexibility. We don't want to necessarily plan it that way, but if a student moved in, it gives us a little bit of flexibility when we build our schedule. On the other hand, if we had 3 students move in and all of a sudden we were 28 and we had to create a plan, we would need to come to the board sort of asking to create a new section or how we would handle that number of students who was over the class size policy of 2. So that's how the board policy really is applied for us. And again, we want to be in the middle of that. And so then how do we talk about, another example of zero-based budgeting. So how do we come up with individual school service and supply budgets? So what we do is at every school we give a dollar amount. So at Elliott Elementary School, Central School, and the Great Works School, we have a value of $220 per student. At the middle school, we have $230 per student, and at the high school, we have $300 per student. So where did that number come from? That came from years of us tracking budgets and being able to find that sweet spot of when we're budgeting things, what was really important. And so one of the things that we found, though, as we've evolved, and I'll get into this a little bit more later, is that things have evolved. And the need for textbooks has changed. Years ago, we were buying tons and tons of textbooks, and with the technology we integrated in the classroom, that's changed a little bit. So, but we take this number, the $220 per student, and so, for example, at LA Elementary School, we have 331 students, as you can see down here. And so we take that 331 and we multiply it by the 220, and that gives us our supply and service account for that building. So that's where the $72,000 roughly comes from. Do the same thing across all of our buildings. So again, 2 examples. So we talked about our teacher needs, and we also talked about our supply needs. It's all based on the number of students that we have. So those are the first steps that we take. So in November when we met, the first thing we did is we took all of our numbers and kind of pulled it a year forward. So we took our 3rd graders and put them in 4th grade. We took our 8th graders and put them in 9th grade, and really just tried to so when we create that, the projected budget enrollment or the enrollment for the budget, that's where it comes from. So just some cost drivers for the budget, just important numbers that are out there that we just need to be aware of. For our salaries and our salaries in payroll taxes, that's about $230,000 all by itself. So there's a $230,000 increase just based on negotiated agreements and what those associated taxes would be. Another thing we are always aware of is that the cost for health insurance. So we have always traditionally budgeted at 10% for our health insurance costs. And so the budgeted 10% increase in our health insurance costs the district about $500,000. And what we do every year is we sit down with the MEA Benefits Trust and we take an opportunity to really look at our history based on the needs and the needs assessment of our employees and staff. And so what that looks at is, over the last year, how much money was spent. And so there's kind of a break-even point where the district comes out ahead, or there's this other point where the insurance company starts to lose money, and that's kind of where our numbers are juggled. And so typically that break-even point is about 88% of the dollars we put in. So if we put in $4 million, let's just say, if we spend 88% of that, that's basically breaking even, because they say there's about 12% cost to actually run the program. So when we sat down with the people in January, really the input that we got is that our usage has been a little bit higher this past year, so we're probably going to be closer to the 8, 9, and 10% range for an increase. But just to give you an idea, the 10% that will be in the budget, that's what that represents. We talked about this a little bit already with the fund balance, and so basically, I may oversimplify it, but I look at some fund balance like our savings account for the district. In the last 4 years, we've had to kind of go into our savings to pay for the budget to keep that increase below the 2.5% or at the 2.5% rate. And so we've had that money where we kind of had to put that extra money in the budget every year, which has been okay when we started with $3 million in the fund balance. But now, after 4 years, we're down closer to the $1.8 million amount. That's the scary level, because what happens is that you really start to get concerned about that 3-paycheck month where now you need to borrow money in order to pay bills. And to be, with full disclosure, there are some bills that we hold on to at this point in time just to make sure we have enough money in the bank. And so that's a reality of what we're facing. And then really talking about kind of some new district goals. What are we going to do? Where do we see the district going? And so we really view this budget as an opportunity to kind of recalibrate ourselves. Where do we see ourselves now? Where do we see ourselves 3 years from now? Where do we see ourselves 5 years from now? So when you start with a budget, where do we start? So what we did is we went back to our strategic plan and said, okay, what's our strategic plan? And really it says students are the reason for our work. Their voice, input, and active engagement is vital to our continued improvement. Their success is how we measure our success. So really that's the document we created together to say, look, what's important? What do we value as a district? Because we want our budget to represent what we value as a district. And so this awesome picture of an atom, as you can see, has students at the center of the atom, at the nucleus of the atom, with staff and community supporting the students. And on the outside, you really see the 8 climate qualifiers is how we define success. So excellent in learning, safety, positive relationships, character, student voice, equity, and support. And then around the outside, we have time resources, fiscal resources, as we kind of look at this. And I love the M in the middle that Ryan put in there just because it's just cool. So, so that's how, so we took that and we looked at our budget and said, okay, these are really the 6 areas that we said were really important as we looked at what was best for our kids. So let's take the first one, excellence in learning. So my recommendation. What my recommendation is the hiring of 4 part-time educational technicians that would be interventionists at Elliott in Central School. So as you remember, back in November or October, we had our summer reading group come in and really talked about what's our next step with the reading. And really the key is going to be early intervention. And so meeting with the staffs at all of the schools, and meeting particularly with the elementary school staff and interventionists, this was something that they really felt strongly about. An opportunity for a person to come in 10 to 12 hours per week to work in small groups with kids to really remediate, give them specialized learning time to be able to become better readers. And that's ultimately the goal. Thought being that if we do that now, we can solve those problems, get them up to grade level, and then down the road, obviously they're going to pay dividends for those students. And so the cost of that's about $40,000. And I think it's important to say, like, John, why did you say 4 part-time people? Like, wouldn't you just want one person to do that? And what, in my mind, I didn't want a full-time person because I don't want people to be confused at what their job is. Their job isn't there to go in and do duties. It's not to watch recess. Their job is to go in and work with students. And I really want some specialized people. Maybe we're hoping that some retired teachers might be like, hey, this is a great opportunity to come in for 2 or 3 days a week, 4 days a week, at 3 hours a clip, to be able to really give that specialized attention for those students. So one of the things that we did is said, look, obviously, we kind of looked at the cost drivers, and there's some big cost drivers out there. And so how do we pay for these things? Because we can't just keep passing money on to different people, so we had to reprioritize what we were doing. So one of the things that we really looked at was fewer educational supplies across all buildings. And so we did a 3-year assessment and kind of looked back at kind of that May 30th, kind of being a magical day, and just said, look, at May 30th, like, what do schools have left in their supply accounts? So we kind of looked at that over a 3-year period. And we found that there was a considerable amount of money that was still on the table at that point in time. And so as we talked about this as a group, we said, hey, look, is this something that we could look at? Is this something you would feel comfortable being able to kind of reassess? And as I said, the principals and assistant principals were fantastic with this. And so we're looking at cutting about $38,000 out of supplies. Now, when I tell you that, we had more than that amount of money left at the end of May, so I am not concerned at all, just to be perfectly clear. But I just think it was a chance for us to kind of recalibrate, like, what do we need to do? And again, I go back to, particularly at the high school, I think when we originally kind of created those numbers, we focused on purchasing of textbooks. And so just a simple example, when I was at the middle school, you could spend $20,000 on a textbook like this. And the reality is, it's not just the $20,000 you spend on that, it's the 17% that they charge you for shipping on top of that. So now all of a sudden you're spending an additional $3,200 or $3,400 on shipping. And so as we kind of have evolved as a district, using technology more, the need for that is less and less and less. And so obviously for the last 3 years we've been able to get by and not using that money. So obviously we're doing a good job with it, but it is something just to be aware of. The other thing is the AVID program. So we've had the AVID program at Marshall Middle School. We've had an opportunity to have the vast majority of our staff trained, but we've kind of migrated away from that. And so right now, on a yearly basis, we're spending about $20,000 to be able to be a part of AVID. And AVID isn't coming to Marshall Middle School anymore to kind of tell us how we're doing with that program. I think what we've done is we've been able to incorporate that into who we are as a building. The Cornell notes, the reflective piece, the Socratic seminars that we do. That's all part of who we are at the middle school. And so when we kind of looked at things, we're not really sure, to be an AVID school, we're either going to do it all in or we're not going to do it, is how I looked at it. And we're kind of in the middle right now. And so to spend that $20,000 in an area right now that we feel like we're really, we don't really necessarily want to be an AVID school. We want to be who we are. And so that would be a cut that we would look for as well. It's a $20,000 reduction from the AVID program. Positive relationships, my recommendation. We looked at the class sizes as I showed on the first slide. Marshford Great Works School needs a new 4th grade teacher based on numbers. And so what's the number we use when we budget? So $85,000 is what it would technically cost for a new teacher. That's the number that we use. So you might say, or people might say, where did that come from, John? Why $85,000? I don't quite understand that. So I can't see for squat, so I'm going to move a little closer so I can see. But, so our average step for a teacher is master step 10. Like, that's our basic, if we were to average everything together, that's where our average step number is. That's about $61,000. Our average health insurance costs, so we take all the people with family plans, we take all the people who are single plans, we take all the people who take cash in lieu, and the average for that is about $18,500. The average dental insurance cost is $523. The average retirement cost is $2,500. The average workman's comp cost is $203. The You have Medicare costs is $891. So the total is like $84,000. So we just said that the basic number we're going to use when we budget is $85,000. So people might just be like, I'm not sure where that comes from because I don't want people to see that and think, oh gosh, we got teachers getting paid $85,000. It goes into it. There's much more into it than just what the salary is. So simple math. If we were to take this year's fourth grade, we have 7 teachers. We have 133 students, and so this is why it's so easy at the elementary school. You take 133 divided by 7, and you quickly say, well, look, that gives us a 19 student to teacher ratio, which is right in the middle of the class size policy where we want to be. Perfect. Well, next year when we bring a 3rd grade from Central School and 3rd grade from Elliott Elementary School, it's 165 students. So you do that same math again real quickly, and all of a sudden we find out we're outside of the class size policy. And so therefore, that's why we're recommending that we need additional teachers at the grade level school. How are we going to pay for this? So again, how do we deprioritize our needs? And so when we looked at Marshall High School, we felt like, particularly, we talked about it a little bit last year, but we have 2 retirements in the math department, and we felt like we could lose a position in Marshall High School in the math department. It would not affect the ability for students to access classes. Enrollment's going down. Math is important to note that it is not a 4-year requirement. English is a 4-year requirement, so math is a little bit different than some of the other subject areas. And so we would go from the current staffing of 8 staff members down to 7. Also at Elliott Elementary School, our pre-K numbers are really low. So our kindergarten enrollment currently is 69 students with our level of staffing. Our projected enrollment for next year in kindergarten is 47 students. We currently have 36 students in our pre-K program, and 3 of those students are out-of-district students. And so one of the caveats with state law is that if your district doesn't offer a public pre-K program, they can then apply to come to our district to take that, and obviously we get the subsidy for it. That's why we have kids out of district coming to our pre-K program. But obviously looking at those numbers, we felt like we didn't need the additional staff number in kindergarten. So both of those positions added together is a savings of about $167,000. So again, I'm just trying to show you, here's our recommendation, and here, as we look at the budget, we really went soup to nuts looking at, you're going to say some of these details like, John, I don't really need to worry about $7,000, but I think it's important to understand this is what our thought process was when we went through this. The level of detail could have been nauseating at times for some people, but it's just important that we're all on the same page. Also, the positive relationships. A full-time technological support person in Marshall High School, and so 4 years ago, when we made the decision to eliminate the position at Marshall High School, we had 4 work tickets over the course of that year. And so when you say, okay, I only have 4 work tickets, and that could be for programming needs, hardware needs, it could be anything, but there was only 4. So we met with Chris Rousseau a couple of weeks ago, and Chris was really strongly advocating for the technological support person at the high school. My question was, well, why? He said, John, basically we have 370 outstanding tickets at the high school that have not been addressed. Because now we've gone to one-to-one with these kids with the laptops. Now we need to be able to support that. And right now there really isn't a way to be able to support that. And so in theory, we have 1 staff member who travels from Elliott Elementary School to Marshall Great Works School to Central School to the high school, and is responsible for the technology of all 4 of those schools, which obviously is a lot to ask of anybody. And so Chris was really good and very clear with his hopes, and I fully support it. Our hope would be to have someone that would be able to help kind of take care of the repair issues, and then once we get that in a better place, help with the printing issues, and then begin to work about integrating technology in the classroom. Like, how can we use technology in a better way to become a resource for all of our staff? So the cost of that position is about $75,000, and it's the same type of math, health insurance, all those types of things, a little bit different pay scale than it would be for a teacher. How do we reprioritize our current needs? And so we really looked at the budget and said, wait a second, we have a number of what are called teacher technological leaders, TTLs is what we call them, positions that we had years ago. But we have about 10 of those positions, 8, that aren't being filled right now. So we have those positions in the budget and the money's not being used. And so we felt like, hey, look, why don't we reallocate that money, put it towards the $75,000 in order to pay for this position. The other thing is less technology equipment. And so it was great for me to go through this sitting down with every one of the departments, but my first thing was like, look, we really did a great job getting that $50,000 and being able to kind of get on the 3-year buying cycle leasing equipment. We don't want to get away from that, and that is not what this money is. This is money that was put in the budget to upgrade our internet, to change switches, help with the bandwidth over the last few years, and we've done that work. We don't need it in the budget right now. And so we would, again, Chris's recommendation is to take that money and put it towards putting that full-time technological support person at the high school. Fewer library ed tech hours at Marshall High School. So that's about $7,000. And so what does that mean, Joe? What does that have to do with technology? Well, we could give 700 kids laptops. We had to have someone to kind of manage it, and there wasn't a technology person who was here every day. So it kind of ended up being that there was a person at the library at ed tech who was kind of the day-to-day management of those machines. And so obviously, if we would have this technological support person at the high school, we would need the extra hours for that person, so that we would take that money and put it towards that as well. Equity and support. A real issue that's really struck us is the need for special education teachers at the school. We have one teacher there right now. We have a number of students that are in the pre-referral and referral process at Central School. There's a diverse and emerging amount of need at that school. So we really feel like in order to meet those students' needs, we need an additional specialist in that building. And so that's really based on our recommendation around really what we're seeing as emerging needs for those students. This is a little bit confusing. We're talking about an additional 3.5 educational technicians, and 2 of them paid by volunteers. So I want to talk about that a little bit, and I don't mean to confuse anybody, but the budget's going to show an increase of 2 ed tech positions, and you're going to see an increase in Rollinsford revenue by 2 ed tech positions. So currently what we do is we have a service model with them, and so if a student from Rollinsford needs an educational technician, we provide that, then we bill them for that service. So now we've had 2 new students that moved into the district that require, one-on-one educational technicians, and so we're going to add that to the budget, but with the addition to the budget, will also mean an increase in revenue to pay for that. So from our perspective, from money out of our pocket, we're going to be talking about an additional 1.5 educational technicians, but we'll see an increase for the 3.5. So that's just so you understand. And where does this, where's the additional 1.5 come from? That comes from from IEPs, student needs, just really being able to meet the needs of those students, and it's a wonderful thing. We have a great special education program, but we need to make sure that we give the kids what they need. And so again, you see, the cost is $148,000 roughly for these 3 educational technicians, and then $85,000. This would show you the cost of 2 educational technicians. That would be revenue from Rollinsford in the budget. That's what that number is. And then additional legal fees. We've had this conversation, but with the evolving climate around special education, we need more money aside to be able to make sure that we're doing the right thing in special education and meeting the students where they're at. And that's about $20,000. Now, a fun one. We had a great conversation, learned a little bit about unified basketball. We had a conversation about where's unified sports going to go next. And so, a meeting with Rich, we had a conversation. It's not really clear what the MPA is going to recommend. We think they're going to either do bocce or they're going to do volleyball. Sounds like maybe bocce might be the winner. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to provide an opportunity for those students every season. And so what our recommendation would be is whatever sponsorship that the MPA gives, we're going to ask that to become a sport, give those kids an opportunity. And then the other one, and so let's just say if they chose bocce to be the sport of choice, we would run an intramural in the fall for unified volleyball. So we would create, using our stipend money, we would create a 3-point stipend, which basically means that we could have kids meeting after school 15 times to be able to learn about volleyball and spend time together and develop those skills. So felt like that was really important to do. The cost is about $4,000. Safety, superintendent's recommendation. We want to convert our part-time school resource officer at the high school to full-time. As I mentioned before, we have our school resource officer here 4 days a week. We really would like to add the additional day. We have a great partnership with the town of South Berwick and the town of Elliott. We had a great conversation with Chief LaJoy. He's 100% supportive of this. We were able to come up with a cost value of about $10,000 to have that additional day at the high school for Officer Upton, which we feel like is really important. As I kind of have joked in the past, Friday's a little bit busier day than Mondays when it comes to student needs, and so to have someone here on Fridays would be an important step for us. It's a relationship where if there was an issue and he needed to be called out, he would be called out. They wouldn't walk, you couldn't say, hey, look, you couldn't respond to a call and vice versa. It's a good partnership. Although this isn't a cost, there is a human resource cost, and we talked about it a little bit more in the past, but providing ALICE training for all of our staff on the November 3rd Professional Development Day. And remember, ALICE is kind of a school safety program where we're going to do some district-wide training on that. So we will spend some money at the end of the year this year to kind of get our principals trained and some of our staff trained, but then there will be a human resource time spent in November getting kind of everybody on the same page and practicing those skills. Character, superintendent's recommendation. An elementary school social worker. Just as we looked at the MIAS information that came out a few months ago, it was startling. Just by chance, sometimes things work out. I happened to stumble into Mr. Bernal's office one Monday morning, and just kind of, he was meeting with the social worker, and what he shared with me was scary. And the fact that I was told, because the social worker at the Great Works School travels between the two schools, between the Central School and the Great Works School, and what she reported is that her caseload dealing with students who are on 504, on IEPs, was so large that there was 12 students at Central School who we were trying to get services for, even outside of the services, that we couldn't meet their need because she didn't have the time in her day to be able to do that. And there was another 5 students at the Great Works School in the same boat. So we had 17 students that are out there that we know were working with families, but families to the point where they want to give them help, but there isn't time to be able to do that. And so that kind of got us thinking a little bit. And so the cost for that elementary school social worker is about $85,000. Sometimes it's good to ask annoying questions. And so we asked some annoying questions of the state. And so what we said was, wait a second, right now we're spending $40,000 a year in our budget for our social work services for students on IEPs. So we're taking that money from our budget and we're paying Sweetser to provide that service for us right now. But wait a second, at Marshwood High School, when we added the social workers, we basically took money out of our special education budget to pay for that. But our subsidy for special education went down because we were spending less money on social work services. And so what we found out, which was wonderful to hear, is that we are able to build back hours of what our social workers would perform back to special education. And so remember, when we get state funding, there's there's the per student money and then there's special education money. And so now we found a way to be able to create an additional revenue source through special education where we're actually building back for those hours. So now, kind of going forward, our social work staff is tracking those hours so that at the end of the year we can bill that out to be able to say, look, this amount of money is being spent regularly, this amount of money is being spent special ed, and we can see subsidy accordingly. So with that being said, we really felt like the way to reprioritize that was to take the $40,000 that we're already spending and create our own person, and have our own person who would work exclusively with students who are on IEPs. And then that person would also, could be, one day a week at Central School, one day a week at Elliott, 3 days a week at the Great Works School. It could be, we could do a day and a half. It could be, however we're going to break that up. We'll find the formula that works for us. But part of that is really trying to work with families and promote resources. And so a lot of it is we can't be all things to all people. But at the same time, we want to be able to help and be a vehicle to be able to give people the support that they need. So this does 2 things. First, it allows us to be able to work with families more, but it also takes all of the special education social work services off the plate, and now it opens up the plate with our partner Sweetser during the school day where we give them a space, and now they have an opportunity to get kids more services that they need. And so now it creates a resource for us, gives us an opportunity to be able to have a little bit more control. It gives us an opportunity for social work to work with teachers, to be able to work with the guidance staff, to really create a wraparound approach. So that's one of the recommendations. And so resources and fiscal responsibility. We have dual responsibility to the citizens of South Berwick and Elliott to provide a high quality education to the residents of our district while maintaining fiscal responsibility. And so that's really kind of one of those overlapping things we've talked about a lot. It's a balancing act at times. So, sources for funds. When we looked at the budget, there were some areas that we really felt like that we could take advantage of. And so there's $147,000 in health savings. And so what that means is last year, or a few years ago, we created this wonderful relationship with the QEA where it's really a cost-sharing model with health insurance. And so we budget for 10%, and if it comes in really low, then they share in some of that success. And then if it doesn't come in at a certain threshold, which is 4.5%, then we take that money and we pay the bill. And so when we did that last year, it was a savings of about $147,000. We'll take that $147,000 and be able to pay for some of the things we're talking about right now. Really getting staff engaged in health and in their own health is key to keeping those numbers down. So this is one of the areas. I mentioned before that when I was hired, I made the decision to take half my position and bring a full-time director of curriculum and learning with Heidi coming over, which was a great decision. I do say so myself. But with that, I also saved a half a position. That's about $50,000 savings for the budget to do that. The district mechanic for transportation saga continues, as it always does. So we've had money set aside for 2 years now, and we really haven't been able to find a part-time mechanic. So what we were able to find is a mechanic that works on Saturdays. And so what we did is said, look, we're going to keep that make a Saturday mechanic in the budget, but we're going to take any of the savings and be able to pull it out of the budget and use it for other things. We will still keep the full-time mechanic salary in there if we're ever fortunate enough to find a pot of gold, which we do in there. We have a $230,000 bond payment, and that was really the money from Honeywell. So we have that 10-year lease to be able to pay for all the Honeywell improvements, and so we're going to take that money and put it towards the budget. And so where's my mind at? You know, well, real quickly, you see the $230,000 bond payment, you see $147,000 in health savings. To me, that's how we get rid of the $370,000 money from fund balance. We had a $15,000 savings in propane and gas. The teacher sabbatical fund, we've had real struggles getting that rolling with the MEF. We want to continue to see if we can get that program to grow, but we want to get the partnership in place in the meantime. And so the recommendation at this point in time would be to pull the money from the budget, continue to work on how do we create a format for that and be able to bring that back at a later time when we have the infrastructure in place for it. I think everybody agrees it's a great idea. It's just really getting the details cemented in who has the ownership, and then we need to do some work on that. And there's an additional $235,000 in state subsidy. So that's a great thing, but remember, when we first got our subsidy amounts back, it looked like we were going to have about a $600,000 shortfall. And then really we got an increase in special education funding. So that money is really kind of based on special education needs and money we're spending in special ed. So it's great that it's there, but just understand that that isn't necessarily, it's not necessarily student number driven, student need driven. So those needs can evolve and change. We have additional $76,000 in additional bonds for tuition, just to be aware of. And then kind of, this is the shaking out the couch and finding nickels underneath it when we do that sometimes. I do that when I'm trying to roll quarters, and just making sure I do the full roll. But there's about $74,000 in minor items. And those minor items would be, we now control the staff for our technology plan, and so we don't need to pay mileage anymore. So there's a small amount of money we're able to save mileage. There was some money saving with our snowplowing contract. There was a line item in special education transportation that wasn't being used that we were able to find. There was a little bit of savings in diesel that we were able to claim. So all those little things add up over time, and so that's what we did. We shook everything out of the couch that we could. And I'm sorry for the level of detail, but this is just the way I think. So better or worse is the way I think. So where are we for next year? So our projected enrollment is up 4 students, so it's up 10%. We're recommending an increase in our budget of 1.34%. And then our projected tax increase would be right at that 2.5% that we had talked about. It's really kind of being that that's our goal. Now here's the tricky part, and I say this as a tale of caution. We're okay. We may be okay in the future, but I just think it's important to note that 2.5% increase that we receive from the towns is about $450,000, which is a lot of money. But when you look at the $450,000 compared to the $480,000 that we're talking about for health insurance increases on a yearly basis, you can quickly see those numbers incongruent, and so there's going to be conflict over time. And obviously, enrollment changes, things could change, but I just think it's important to kind of keep that in people's minds as we go forward. That when we created that 2.5%, increase was kind of the goal. The thought was at the time is that we were a 50% receiver. So for every dollar we got from the state, we got a dollar from the towns. And now it's not quite the case anymore. So now we're more like a 34% receiver. So every 34, every, you can figure it out. It's not going the wrong direction. Capital improvements, just to kind of give you an overview of capital improvements. Central School parking lot looks like the moon, and so we need to fix the pavement. That's something that needs to get done. We need to finish the paving at Elliott Elementary School. The 3-year heating system upgrade at the Marshall Middle School, and the 3-year heating system upgrade at the Marshall Great Brook School. So remember, kind of whenever we do anything with heating, it's kind of, there's three parts to it. There's the front end, which is the computer that controls it. There's the back end, which is the boiler that heats it. And then there's all the stuff that talks to the two things. And so we've got the computer, we've got the boiler, just the stuff that talks to each other is the missing part right now. So we have outdated technology, that's that bridge right now, so we have to find a way to be able to bridge that technology. That's going to be about a $100,000 project for each building. And so right now we're looking at doing a 3-year proposal, paying about $35,000 a year for each building to be able to get and fix that. We run purchasing of school buses to remain on a replacement cycle. Typically, we purchase either 2 or 3 buses every year, depending on where we are with our cycle. And then the other class is Marshall Great Works School. So we're going to partner with the MEF. We're going to partner with the Marshall Great Works School parents, and we're going to make it happen. And so there's some beautiful drawings, and Jerry's been a visionary, and we're excited about the work we're doing. But those are just some overview of capital improvements. Okay, further programmatic and capital improvements. So that I know that this is kind of always a question, like, that if we could have anything, what would it be? Slide. So other things we would like to potentially do, really add a part-time interventions at Marshall Middle School, and that costs us about $45,000. And so one of the things that we're seeing is that we give great specific reading support through the elementary school. But when the kids get to Marshall Middle School, that specific reading support necessarily isn't there. We don't have that special. So we do a great job of helping kids with work completion, putting supports around those kids, but to have that expert in that building to be able to work with those most struggling readers is critical. And so that's one of the things that we really feel like, that we'd like to see that happen. With that being said, my hope would be that if we ever had the opportunity to have the Rollinsford 6th grade come over, that position would go from part-time to full-time. And so but that's just kind of one of those pieces that we transition those students. We just have some kids who just aren't really where they need to be, and we need to give them that specific instruction. And it has to be in addition to what they're currently getting. It can't be in light of, it has to be together. It needs to be double the effort. And the other thing is really, if we had additional money to be able to put towards that 3-year project at the Great Works School and the middle school, we have a 3-year plan. If we had an additional $13,000, we could really turn that into a 2-year plan. And the reason that I want to do that is it just takes that variable out of the budget, 3 years from now. So if we can eliminate that now and pay for it up front, it's just one less thing we have to worry about down the road. So there is capital projects that we have to do there. What are we most proud of? Maybe the fireworks. Things to celebrate. The strategic plan is what we base, what is best for students, and what we base our decision making on. So we took what we sat as a group and we said, this is what's most important. We worked collaboratively with the board and said, this is the stuff we value. And so we really feel like the budget reflects that. Transparency and staff engagement was in the process. So I went to every single school, I met with every single staff and said, look, I'm starting the budget. This is how I look at the budget. Here are the cost drivers. Like, if you have any thoughts, do you have any ideas? I just wanted to be as transparent as possible. I didn't want people to think the budget is this kind of this mystic process that takes place. And got their feedback. Got some great feedback from staff, and I think a lot of them just appreciated the fact that they understood how it was created. They don't necessarily. The statement that someone made to me is like, John, everybody likes sausage, but no one likes to know how sausage is made sometimes. And so we tried to show them, like, this is the process that we do when we make it. But okay, that's a good analogy. Again, collaborative decision making. We spent a great deal of time as an administrative team going over this. I practiced this with them. We've taken their feedback. We started with students. There's a balancing act. We need to balance what's fiscally, responsible. We need to balance the resources that we have, but we also need to say, like, what do our kids need? How do we evolve? And then that was some of the work that we did to try to figure out where we're going to go in the future. Budget, the balancing programmatic improvement and financial responsibility. So if you would have told me back in July that we were going to be able to do all these things and still come to 2.5% and only have a 1.34% increase to the budget, I would have said, I'll take it now. I just feel like that's I feel like we threaded the needle, to be totally honest with you. We looked at our needs. We were able to get rid of that $370,000 anchor around our neck. At the same time, we were able to go to the committee with a straight face, saying, look, we're still holding true to our word of what we told you with the 2.5% increase. And that is it. I don't know if you have any questions.